if you will, let's go to James chapter 5. I'll come back to those sheets in just a minute. But last week we're getting near the end of this particular letter of James. And so we dealt with verses 7, 8, and I believe 9 and 10 last week. But again, what was the key word we noted from those verses that are going to continue through this? But what was one of those key ideas? Do you remember? Starts with a P. Patience. And again, remember, we're thinking about this term in the aspect of being able to suffer long, right? Long suffering, to be able to endure, right? To remain steadfast. And we're like those bridges that are out in the water, and the water continues to push against it, but the bridge, it remains strong because it's founded strong. And it may endure difficult times when storms are beating against it, when the waves are coming in, but it remains firm and solid. And as Christians, are we always hunky-dory? Everything always great? No, it's not. Even as our prayer request tonight can tell us. But as a child of God, James is reminding his readers, he's reminding us that we need to remain steadfast. Notice the end of verse 8. He says, establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Establish your hearts. That's the English Standard Translation. Again, what's he asking us to do? Stay firm. To renew your confidence, right? The idea of do we build a bridge and just leave it alone? What do? We do maintenance. We have inspectors out there all the time. We're looking for things, for cracks or for any kind of imperfection that might cause future harm, right? And we try to then go back and repair those things. Christianity's like that. We need to continually establish our hearts, remaining in the faith. And with what focus? For the second coming. Second coming. We're looking for the coming of our Lord. If we don't remain patient, what's going to happen? Verse 9. We're going to start to grumble and complain. When we lose our focus where it should be, that's when we begin to grumble and complain against one another, ultimately against the Lord, right? And so we're not to be like that. All right, so let's go down to verse 10, and this is where we'll pick back up. So verse 10 says, as an example of suffering and patience, brothers, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Behold, we consider those who remained, what? Steadfast. You have heard of the steadfastness of Job and have seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. So there's a lot there. Let's look at what we can take away. So first he says, as an example of steadfastness in suffering and in patience, who does he put forward? Well, he brings Job up, but before that he brings up the prophets, right? The prophets are first. When we consider the prophets of God, been a lot of them, right? Yeah, we're talking about Jeremiah in our Sunday morning class, but man, there's been so many. Anybody here feel like you could name all of them in Scripture? That'd be a hard task, wouldn't it? I was thinking about that today. I was trying to go through all the ones I could think of. There have been a lot of different men and women who have spoken for the Lord, who have prophesied faithfully. Go over, if you will, to Matthew's Gospel. And let's go to Matthew 23:34. Notice what Jesus says about the prophets. And if you back up to verse 33, it sets the tone and tenor of what he's talking about. Somebody read 33 and 34.
You snakes, you brood of vipers, how will you escape being condemned to hell? Therefore I am sending you prophets and wise men and teachers. Some of them you will kill and crucify, others you will flog in your synagogues and pursue from town to town.
So, I just wanted to read 33 to kind of get in the mood of where Jesus is. But when he says, you serpents, you brood of vipers, who is he talking about? Who? The scribes and Pharisees. In a broad sense, who's he? He's talking to the religious leaders of the Jewish people over a wide spectrum of time. And 34, what does he point out to them? What has God done throughout their history for them? And then how do they respond? They killed them, right? He said, some you've killed, some you've crucified, some you have flogged, others you've persecuted from town to town. I always think of Elijah with that. You know, poor Elijah, when Ahab and Jezebel were chasing him from place to place, and he was simply just trying to do what God had called him to do. He's not the only one, though, right? Elisha had his difficulties. Who is the Micaiah? Who Ahab, when the northern king Jehoshaphat comes down and they're wanting to go to battle, and Ahab asked Jehoshaphat to come out with him, and he's like, well, we need to inquire of the Lord. And he brings in all those prophets that he likes, and they're all telling him, you got it, king, you go out to battle, this battle's yours. And then Jehoshaphat, that whole thing is just so interesting to me, what's his response? He hears all these prophets all saying the same thing, and he says, isn't there one more prophet, right? And I love this. He says, well, and I'm paraphrasing, there's this one guy. This one guy, but he never says anything I like to hear, right? And that's Micaiah, and he comes in and he doesn't say anything he wants to hear. But Israel has over and over again rejected the prophets of God. They have, as he mentions here, they've killed them, they've persecuted them, they've done all sorts of evil things to them. Notice, if you will, another text. Go to Acts chapter 7 and verse 52. What's going on in Acts 7:50, or what's going on in Acts 7? Stephen's sermon, right? He gives us a very powerful sermon. And what does he say in verse 52 about the religious rulers of his day?
That they persecuted all of the prophets.
Mm-hmm. Notice verse 52. He says, which of the prophets did your fathers not persecute? And they killed those who announced beforehand the coming of the righteous one, whom you have now betrayed and murdered. Right? He sarcastically, I mean it's sarcasm, he's asking a rhetorical question, which of them have you not persecuted? And the truth is, the answer to that is they've done it to all of them. Almost in every case. There have been a few, right? You might think about David and Nathan. When David has sinned, in 2 Samuel, Nathan the prophet is sent to him, and he uncovers David's sin for him. David is one of the few who said, I've sinned, it's me, right? But that's not the typical case. You also have Jonah going to Nineveh, this very wicked, evil Gentile city, and they respond faithfully. But often that's not the case. And so when we come back to James chapter 5, and we're talking about this concept of remaining steadfast. James says, consider the prophets. He also brings up a second example that was mentioned in verse 11, which is the name Job. Job, a book that is fascinating to read. It's written poetically, a lot of it. It's 42 chapters, and in those 42 chapters you have a few different dialogues going on. You have Job and his three friends, and you have the young man who's been sitting there listening, and then finally you have Job and God having a conversation. Think about the life of Job. Was Job always patient with God? He wasn't always patient, right? You go back and read the letter, you don't get the sense he always said, God, I'll just wait for you to answer. He does eventually get worn down, and he begins to complain. And he has to be reminded by God, right? Well, what's going on here? You don't understand, and I don't expect you to understand, but you can act like you can stand before me and call me out. So when he says the steadfastness of Job, what is he really talking about? If you go to Job chapter 1 and read verse 22.
A lot of, in other versions, is perseverance.
Yeah, and I like that translation too, right? And patience is a good translation as long as we understand what he means by patience, right? It is this idea of perseverance, right? Of long suffering. Those will be good terms there too. Somebody read Job 1:22.
All this Job sinned not, nor charged God with all foolishly.
So, it's kind of an interesting thing there. What's going on in Job 1? Not everything yet, right? Not yet, but he's lost at this point. He's lost his livelihood. He's lost, his children, right? He's in a pretty desperate place. Chapter 2, he'll lose his health and his standing. Yet, the writer says, in all of this, he did not sin, right? He did not sin in a particular way. He's not trying to say that Job was sinless, but what is he saying? He didn't blame God. Right? He did not sin in that way. Go to, let's go to chapter 2 and verse 10. Another kind of fascinating statement. And so Job's wife makes a statement. What does she say? She said what? Curse God and die. Now, I know there's a little controversy on the way that's translated. I'm not going to get into all that. But I do want to look at Job's response. How does he respond? Because they're foolish. And then how does he end it, though? Why does he say that it is a foolish statement to blame God or to curse God? Why is that foolish?
Should we not accept when things don't go right, as well as when we accept things from God that blesses us?
Mm-hmm.
Should we accept good and bad from God?
And when bad things happen to us, did God make that happen? I actually think that's a foolish statement. God didn't do that. God doesn't do bad things. God cannot commit sin, cannot be tempted by sin, nor does he tempt any man to sin. That's James. Come back to our study. God doesn't make evil things happen to us. But evil things happen because we live in a broken world. And we sin. Both of those reasons. So wickedness happens because of that. It doesn't happen because of God. And so Job says, shall we receive good things from God, and shall we not receive evil? Now, he's not saying evil in the sense of sinful, but he's talking about difficult times. Now, again, I don't think those difficult times come from God. But I think the question he's really asking is, will you only remain faithful when times are good? That is a weak, shallow faith. And despite him complaining at times to God, he never lost his faith in God, nor his trust in God. He remained faithful. Now, you know, as the book ends, God returns blessings back to Job. But Job was steadfast. Yes, he suffered storms, he suffered difficulty, yet he did not give in. He did not succumb to the pressure. He withheld. His faith withheld. And so he ends this in verse 11 by saying, you have seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. That's who God is. God is compassionate and merciful. Romans 8 tells us what? James tells us, James tells us in chapter 1, all good and perfect things come from where? From God, with whom there is no variation or turning of shadow. That's God. God is a God of mercy and a God of compassion. And so as Christians, we remember that. We don't waver. Okay, we get to verse 12. He's going to take that and move to a new topic. Any questions before I move on? Yes, ma'am.
It's about like Job. Like, there's a lot of people who blame God or something about what, like, you know what I mean? Like when they read it, I guess I don't know how they're reading it, with what type of perspective. Everyone has their own opinions, but like, how do I like explain to someone that like those bad things happen to Job because the devil was basically wanting to test out whether Job had faith in God or not?
That's what the text actually says, right? I would just start with the text.
Yeah, just
God did not do those things. Satan did. I would just go back to the text and say, this is what actually happened. Have you read it? And, yeah. So there's a deeper study there, but that's where I would start.
Another example that they were using, James, his idea is Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
All the things befell Joseph, and yet Joseph, I cannot see this my God. He never perceived it. It was God's fault. His brothers did him the way they did, or any of those other bad things happened to him.
And it's not God's fault any of those things happened to him. That lays at the fault of the people who did it, right? It's the fault of the brothers. It's the thought of Potiphar's wife, right? Those things happen because it's the fault of the butler because he forgot Joseph. It's not God's fault, nor was it Joseph's fault. Sometimes evil things just happen. Yes, ma'am.
In John 16:33, Jesus tells them that in this world you're going to have tribulation.
Mm-hmm.
So even when becoming a Christian, it doesn't mean that everything's going to go my way. Because Jesus said we're going to have tribulation, but take heart, it means you will have peace. So the point is we got to stay grounded in Jesus so that we can have this peace and stay steadfast while we are going through these afflictions.
Absolutely. All right, let's go to verse 12. And so this is a kind of an offshoot of that discussion. He says, above all, my brothers, do not swear either by heaven or by earth or by any other oath, but let your yes be yes and your no be no, so that you may not fall under condemnation. All right, so one of the signs of a lack of steadfastness is a wavering, right? When you waver on certain things. One of those things is when you give your word. and you don't uphold it. When you have to make a vow every time to get people to believe you. Should you have to make a vow every time you tell somebody you're going to do something? If you have to make a vow every time, there's a problem. You're not trustworthy. I gave you those sheets, and I found those interesting. You can take a look at them, check for any mistakes. But we've mentioned before the parallels between James and Matthew, and in specific, the Sermon on the Mount. And you see there the parallels in those texts. Again, I'll let you read through it, and you can, if you find a mistake, you can let me know. But here's one that's almost directly taken out of the Sermon on the Mount. If you go to Matthew 5, 34 to 37, you'll note, I think, there that Jesus says almost exactly what James writes. Go, if you will, to Matthew 5:34. We'll actually back up to verse 33. So Matthew 5:33. The text says, "Again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn." Right? Keep your word. "But I say to you," so Jesus says, you see that old principle? I'm going to expound on it. I want to take it a little further. He says, "But I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. Do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black." Some of us would like that, right? "Let what you say simply be yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil." The idea there, evil intention. Right? Some translations may have the word evil or the phrase evil one there. Is Jesus telling us it's wrong to ever take an oath? Now I get some head shaking no's. Any yeses? We'll get y'all out in the middle and y'all can fight.
I think no.
The warning is if you take an oath, you must be sure
Yeah.
you don't keep it.
Well, and the reason we know it's not the case that it's wrong to take an oath is men and women of the text took oaths. Paul took an oath. He vowed the Nazirite vow in the book of Acts. You can see other oaths that were taken. I do think it is the principle that Jesus is trying to get us to understand. Every time we make a promise, it shouldn't be by oath, right? We take marriage vows. That's an oath, right? When you stand up before the preacher and you and your spouse say, "I do," what are you doing? You're taking a vow, right? You're vowing certain promises. But if your spouse asks you to clean out the dishwasher, you shouldn't need to say, get down on your knees and say, "I solemnly swear by anything that I will do this," right? You should be trustworthy enough to go and clean out the dishwasher like you promised to do. See, that would not be faithfully keeping your vow, right? Because you have time limits. But it's not the negation of all vows, but it is the idea of when you make a promise, it's important to keep it. Why is that so important, though, to mention? Why does James or Jesus take the time to talk about this?
Because if you think about it, like if you say that you're a Christian and you make a promise and you break that promise, you dishonor God. And especially if you say, I swear to, or I swear by the, or, you know, you dishonor God when you break that promise. So
Yes, you defile the name of God with that to whom you made that promise. You're what?
Thou shalt not lie.
Thou shalt not lie. Right? God cannot lie. That's one of the impossibilities of God. He cannot do that. Go ahead, Jody.
Ecclesiastes says that you should not vow, but if you do vow, don't come back and say it was a mistake.
Yes, that is one of the principles of the law of Moses. Once you make a vow, you're under vow. Who's the judge? Who's the judge that made the Jephthah? Ooh, that's one he wished he had back. What a foolish vow he made. He didn't have to make it. He didn't. Now, I have reason to believe his daughter was not sacrificed, but we can talk about that another time. But he still lost his daughter because of a foolish vow, right? And so he's saying, don't make promises you cannot keep, right? Because you are a representative of Jesus Christ. You're a representative of the church. Yes, ma'am.
I don't know if this, it seems to me like today that people take swearing, vows, oaths a lot less seriously today than they did during this time.
Maybe because we overuse them.
Right. It's very common language, it seems.
And just take marriage, right? How we don't take those vows sacred. As I'm talking culturally, right? Culturally, we do not hold those as sacred as we once did. And that kind of goes back to this issue. Keeping your word is important. Doing what you promised.
Let's use that on make New Year's resolutions.
That's why he doesn't do it. Yeah. Well, that's verse 12. Okay, so we'll stop here. We're going to come back. We'll close out the end of the chapter next week. We're going to talk about, end it by talking about prayer and faith and how those two work together. And then we'll end with a call to evangelism and restoration. Thank you all for being here. We'll come back to verse 13 next week. As we close